Teddy Bear Killer. Ted Bundy was an infamous serial killer, rapist, and necrophile who terrorized the United States in the 1970s. He confessed to murdering at least 30 young women across several states. Bundy was known for his charm and good looks, which he used to gain the trust of his victims. He often targeted college-aged women, using deception to lure them into his grasp. Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death, ultimately meeting his fate in the electric chair in 1989. Milwaukee Cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender, infamous as the Milwaukee Cannibal, or the Milwaukee Monster. Active in the late 20th century, he was convicted of murdering and dismembering 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer's crimes included acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. He lured his victims, primarily African American, to his apartment with promises of money or sex, where he drugged, killed, and then mutilated them. Dahmer's heinous acts shocked the world when they were uncovered in 1991. He was sentenced to 16 life terms in prison, where he was later killed by a fellow inmate in 1994. Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and rapist, notorious as the Killer Clown for his sinister double life. Active in the 1970s, he sexually assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Gacy often performed as a clown at children's parties and charity events, using his guise to lure victims. His victims were typically strangled or suffocated before being buried in the crawl space beneath his house. His crimes were uncovered in 1978. He was convicted and sentenced to death, ultimately executed by lethal injection in 1994. The Devil. Charles Manson was an American cult leader and criminal mastermind famous for orchestrating the Manson family murders in the late 1960s. Manson convinced his followers to carry out a series of brutal killings, including the infamous Tate LaBianca murders in 1969. The victims, including actress Sharon Tate, were chosen at random, with Manson hoping to incite a race war he called Helter Skelter. Despite not physically participating in the murders, Manson was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy charges in 1971. He died in prison in 2017. Damsel of Death. Aileen Wuornos was an American serial killer who became famous in the late 1980s. She was a former prostitute who claimed to have killed 7 men in self-defense while working as a sex worker along highways in Florida. Wuornos was convicted and sentenced to death in 1992. Despite her claims of self-defense, she was executed by lethal injection in 2002. Butcher of Plainfield. Ed Gein was an American murderer and body snatcher who operated in Wisconsin during the 1950s. He became famous for his gruesome crimes, which included the murder of at least 2 women and the exhumation of corpses from graves. Gein's horrific acts inspired numerous fictional characters in horror movies, including Norman Bates from Psycho, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. Gein's disturbing actions shocked the nation when they were uncovered in 1957, leading to his arrest and eventual confinement in a mental institution. Son of Sam. David Berkowitz, famously known as the Son of Sam, was an American serial killer who terrorized New York City in the late 1970s. Berkowitz claimed that his neighbor's dog, which he believed was possessed by a demon, commanded him to commit murder. Between 1976 and 1977, Berkowitz shot and killed 6 people and wounded several others in a series of random attacks. Berkowitz was apprehended in 1977 and confessed to the shootings. He was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, dubbed the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who terrorized California during the mid-1980s. Ramirez went on a brutal crime spree, committing a series of home invasions, assaults, rapes, and murders. His crimes were random and sadistic in nature. He often struck at night, targeting people in their homes. His reign of terror ended in 1985 when he was captured and convicted of 13 counts of murder, along with other crimes. Red Ripper. Andrei Chikatilo was a Ukrainian serial killer and rapist, active in the Soviet Union during the 1970s and 1980s. Chikatilo's crimes involved the sexual assault, murder, and mutilation of at least 52 women, children, and young adults. His victims, often vulnerable individuals such as runaways and homeless people, were brutally attacked in secluded areas. The horrific nature of his crimes often involved dismemberment and cannibalism. He was apprehended in 1990 and later convicted of multiple counts of murder. Chikatilo was executed in 1994. Gray Man. Albert Fish was an American serial killer, cannibal, and child molester, infamous as the Gray Man and the Werewolf of Wisteria. Active in the early 20th century, Fish committed a series of heinous crimes, including the abduction, molestation, and murder of young children. His nicknames reflected the sinister nature of his crimes and his ability to blend into society unnoticed. He was eventually apprehended, tried, and convicted in 1935. Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway was an American serial killer who terrorized Washington state in the 1980s and 1990s. Ridgway targeted young women, mainly prostitutes and runaways, whom he picked up along the Pacific Highway South. He lured his victims with the promise of money or drugs before brutally murdering them. Ridgway's killing spree earned him the moniker Green River Killer due to the location where many of his victims' bodies were discovered, near the Green River in Washington. He confessed to murdering 71 women, though investigators believe the actual number may be higher. Ridgway was apprehended in 2001 and later convicted of 49 counts of murder. He is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. BTK Killer. Dennis Rader became famous for his heinous crimes in Kansas between the 1970s and early 2000s. The acronym BTK stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, which described Rader's method of operation. He meticulously planned and executed a series of brutal murders, often targeting women and sometimes entire families. Rader taunted police and the media with letters detailing his crimes. Despite a hiatus in his killings, Rader resurfaced in 2004 and was eventually caught due to advances in forensic technology. In 2005, he pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison. Monster of the Andes. Pedro Alonso Lopez is a Colombian serial killer who confessed to murdering over 300 girls across South America. Active in the 1970s and 1980s, Lopez primarily targeted young girls, luring them away from crowded areas before assaulting and strangling them. Lopez's crimes went undetected for years due to the transient nature of his lifestyle and the lack of coordination among law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. He was eventually captured in 1980 in Ecuador, where he confessed to his horrific crimes. Lopez was convicted of multiple murders, but was released from prison in 1998 for good behavior. His current whereabouts are unknown. Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, was a serial killer who terrorized California in the late 1970s. Chase earned his name due to his gruesome habit of drinking the blood of his victims. He committed a series of horrific murders, often targeting random individuals in their homes. He was eventually apprehended in 1979 and convicted of multiple counts of murder. Confession Killer. Henry Lee Lucas was a serial killer known for his confessions to hundreds of murders, although many of these confessions were later found to be false. Active in the 1970s and 1980s, Lucas confessed to killing hundreds of people across the United States, leading to his nickname, the Confession Killer. However, investigation and evidence revealed that Lucas was responsible for far fewer murders than he claimed. Lucas was ultimately convicted of 11 homicides, and he died in prison in 2001. Speed Freak Killers. Charles Ng and Leonard Lake were serial killers and rapists who committed a series of heinous crimes in the 1980s. Operating in California, Ng and Lake abducted, tortured, and murdered numerous young women, as well as some men and children. They even documented their crimes on videotape. And Lake's victims were often lured to their secluded cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains under false pretenses, where they were subjected to prolonged torture and sexual abuse before being killed. Their crimes came to light in 1985 when Lake committed suicide after getting arrested for shoplifting, leading authorities to discover their torture chamber and evidence of their crimes. Enya was eventually captured and handed over to the United States, where he was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Ken and Barbie Killers. Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo were a Canadian couple notorious for their heinous crimes in the 1990s. Together, they kidnapped, raped, and killed several young women, including Carla's own sister, Tammy Homolka. Paul Bernardo was the primary perpetrator, committing acts of sexual assault and murder, while Carla Homolka was complicit and participated in the crimes. They often videotaped their crimes. Despite her involvement in the crimes, Homolka was released from prison in 2005. Paul Bernardo remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence for his crimes. Butcher Baker. Robert Hansen was an American serial killer and rapist who terrorized Alaska in the 1970s and early 1980s. Hansen targeted women, particularly sex workers and dancers, whom he abducted and then released into the Alaskan wilderness to hunt like wild animals. He would then track and kill them using his hunting skills. Hansen's crimes went undetected for years. However, Hansen's reign of terror came to an end in 1983 when one of his intended victims managed to escape and provide crucial information to the authorities. Following his arrest, Hansen confessed to the murders of at least 17 women, although it is believed that the actual number may be higher. Hansen was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to 461 years in prison. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other videos and hit that subscribe button. See you next time.